Well, hi, everybody. My name is Brian Glow. I'm a professional magician here in Winnipeg, Canada, and I'm here with Tom Kowalski, technician to the stars. Tom and I have known each other for many decades and have traveled all over the world together. And we're going to be talking about being thankful. I mean, one of the greatest things I've got to be thankful for is the fact that I can make my living doing the one thing that I absolutely love to do, which is magic. And it's not just the doing of magic, it's the sharing. It's sharing the experience and sharing the fun that I get to have meeting people, whether it's live or now virtual, which is a whole nother game changer. Isn't that cool? But the whole idea of being able to travel around the world, be able to interact with people, share some joy, and I get just as much out of it because the people I meet tell me wonderful stories and interact with me. And it's been a life-changing. And I started full-time as a professional magician in about 1973, but I really started learning my craft of magic as just a little kid in 1965 when I got a chance to see magicians on TV. And I mean, they were wonderful, especially the Ed Sullivan Show. Now, Ed Sullivan, for those of you who aren't old enough, was a variety show. It had music, gymnasts, weightlifters, jugglers, magicians, fire eaters, you name an act, and it was on an Ed Sullivan Show. Now, the one thing about Ed Sullivan is if you got on Ed Sullivan, like in its later shows that came after it, like Johnny Carson and other talk shows, if you got onto the Ed Sullivan Show, literally overnight, you were famous. And I don't mean like locally famous, I mean internationally famous. Some of the biggest acts in the world actually went on the Ed Sullivan Show to become famous. When the Beatles came to the United States, their first stop before they did their show in Wembley was to do the Ed Sullivan Show. And it literally took them from a European band to a international world-renowned band, the Beatles. It's one of the reasons they became so famous so fast and sold out every single crowd in North America was because of the Ed Sullivan appearance. And the same thing happened with the Rolling Stones. Well, I saw magicians on the show all the time, and they made me laugh. I mean, as a young kid, I'd be sitting there trying to figure out how they did it. I could never figure out how they did the tricks. I think finally, after trying and having no success, I would go to my mom, and she would say, look, let's go. There's a new library in Winnipeg. It was the West Kildonan Library where we lived. And this is 1965. We'll go and see what they've got. And they happen to have two magic books. One of them was on Houdini, the greatest escape artist in the world. And it was his biography, literally a story of how he did what he did. Not technically how he got out of chains and straitjackets, but more about the story of his life and his exploits, because he was quite famous. But the second book was called Magic of the World. It was written by John Mulholland, and it was a book where, if written for kids, that every single trick in that book was from a different country. Tricks from Europe and tricks from Asia, even North American indigenous communities. Really wonderful things. And it formed my very first magic show. Those tricks were the basics of my first magic show. And I was only 8 years old. I did my own birthday party. So it was quite a limited repertoire, but fortunately I didn't have a lot of people there, so I could do this over and over again. But it was a great way to take me out of my shell. I was very, very shy. And I mean, I would practice my tricks in front of a mirror. And, you know, you just dream of all the things that you could do and never really believing that you could actually make a living, let alone even doing a few birthday parties for a few bucks. So to be able to look back on a career that has stemmed 5 decades is blows me away. And I made sure that I was educated. I got 3 degrees, one in psychology, one in anthropology, and one in computer science. But really, magic is the only thing that I've ever done in my entire life to make a living. And like I said, it started off doing birthday parties and bar mitzvahs and christenings and weddings, and I even did a funeral. So there's always a time you can do it. But I learned very soon that you can make magic by being famous, or you could make a living at it by doing events, and I started to be an event magician. I started doing corporate work, and that was really was the turning point in my career. In 1973, I started off at the Lock, Stock, and Barrel restaurant. That was in Winnipeg. It was a steak and rib place, a high-end place. And I would go from table to table to table doing magic between the soup and salad. And I got a flat fee, plus I got tips from the tables. And that got me to know people. Because it was a higher end restaurant, there was people from different companies and corporations that would come in, and every once in a while someone would say, well, oh, you would be great at a trade show. And I'd go, oh yeah, that would be great. And I'd kind of go around going, what's a trade show? And when the Winnipeg Convention Center opened up, I found out what trade shows were all about. It was one of the most incredible things where thousands of businesses get together, each with different individual booths, and they would try to attract a crowd. And by attracting those crowd, they would then get a chance to get their sales message on. Now, thousands and thousands of people would be going back, so stopping those people for even a few moments was paramount to getting your sales message across. Well, in comes Brian Glow, and I was the thing to stop people. I'd be doing card tricks and coin tricks and mind reading, and right in front of the booth, very close up and personal to people. And this would stop them and go, and at the moment we could stop them, I learned very quickly that you had to get a message in with the tricks. You couldn't just do the tricks. People didn't care about the tricks. And the companies certainly weren't hiring me to do the tricks. They were there because they want their message across, not my message across. So I would take a product, whether it was a widget or some sort of thing, and I would incorporate it right in the presentation. So if I was doing a trick with if it was a laser company and they couldn't bring $50,000 lasers there and they had to show how metal was cut out, I would take the pieces that were cut out already and I would do magic with those little cut out pieces. And it intrigued people because in that I got to talk about how strong the lasers were and how fast the lasers were. And then if they were interested, the salespeople would descend on this few people that were still left because they really wanted to have information about that particular product. And it was one step closer to being able to actually sell them on the product that they were selling. Because you didn't want just anybody coming to the booth. You only wanted to figure out who were really interested in that product. So if you were talking about widgets, you weren't going to be talking about cookbooks. And if you were talking about the latest paint colors, you certainly didn't want to be talking about wood siding. You had to be very specific, and you wanted to attract only the people that your company represented. And that was my job. And I got to do that for hundreds and hundreds of companies, over 500 companies around the world in 45 different countries. But trade shows were only one aspect of it. I got to do sales meetings and product launches and banquets for these people, and they really became my extended family. I got to do, at one point, in a year, I might do 5 or 6 different events for that one company because they knew that once I was there, their sales increased. And that was the bottom line. So I became a corporate magician from the 70s on till even now. I still do it. And it is still my favorite. Although in the last 12 years, my efforts have kind of changed a little bit because I've wanted to kind of give back. And I've started going into the remote communities of the Arctic, and I've been doing anti-bullying and anti-suicide shows, and using that same technique of messaging, using those corporate messaging and how I inculcated them with the magic tricks. Now I'm taking the messaging of anti-bullying and suicide awareness and socialization, and in fact, even now about COVID, and putting them in different kinds of tricks that make people more aware and more memorable about the things that I'm talking about. So when they walk out of that show, they not only got the message, but they had actionable things that they could do the moment they walked out of that show. And for me, that was very important because especially in the Arctic where they have the highest suicide rate in the world, I really wanted to try and make a difference. And I'm thankful that I think I have, and I continue to go back. The moment COVID is finished, I will be there in the communities live again. I've gone all the way to the North Pole and from coast to coast to coast, and now I'm doing it via video and getting great reactions because through the way of Zoom and through other peer-to-peer networks, I'm able to actually talk back and forth to people. I'm teaching them how to do magic tricks, and it's just a different kind of engagement. It's almost like you're right there. but you really have to be engaging. You have to be in the moment when you're doing something like this. It's ultra important that the empathy can go both ways. And so having said that, I'd like to teach you guys how to do one little magic trick before I go. This is really a lot of fun, and it's really simple, and it uses our old friend, the elastic band. Now, it's kind of neat because it's an unbroken circle, just like life. You can do all kinds. Everyone's got elastic band. That's not an expensive item, but you can actually train an elastic band. People think, oh, just animals can be trained. No. Inanimate objects can be trained. You just have to be more patient. For instance, all I have to do is look at it sternly and say, jump. When I say jump, if it's trained, jump. This one's almost like a puppy, so you got jump. See, it jumped. Now, it's kind of fun because you can go back, jump, and it jumps back. It's kind of weird and silly, isn't it? Yeah, I know. It is just an elastic band, but it's one of the first little magic tricks that I learned. I'm going to show you how to do it and then show you a few little things that can make it be a little more interesting. So you start off with the elastic on your fingers, and as you're springing it, what the audience, that's you guys, did not see is that when I pulled it, I suddenly took all 4 of my fingertips and shoved it inside. So now the audience sees this and they assume that it's going around only 2 fingers. Really, it's the 4. Now, if I open my fingers, it actually rolls over to the other side. Now, I'm going to do this in very slow motion. So once again, if I put my fingers in, this forces it over the fingers. Now, of course, you wouldn't do it this way because that would kind of give it away, but this way, it looks kind of cool. Now, just making it jump back and forth gets awfully boring. You can do it once and it's about all before it looks kind of like, okay, pretty pedestrian. By adding storylines and having a little bit more playfulness, you get a little more out of it. Also, it gives you the idea that you can now introduce another one because that's simple. I want to prove that it doesn't just do that, which it really is. And I do that by adding another band. So make sure it's a different color or they won't get it. It won't look like it's switching. And once again, I say jump, and this pink one is on this side, the green on this side. They will switch places like that. And it really looks amazing because it doesn't look like you've done anything. This is just slightly more complicated. You're going to take one of the elastic bands and place your finger there. By pulling it down, you get a little space there. You're going to take your fingers and shove it into the space. And then when you open your hand, they switch places. I'll make this a little more visual. This is the space we're going to put our fingers into. Now this does take a bit of practice, I'm not kidding. But once you do master it, and it takes 10 minutes, you'll be able to do that. And then the faster you open up your hand, the more interesting it looks. Now let's take it one step further, and I call this the Houdini, because we're going to now prove that it doesn't go over the fingertips by putting yet a third elastic band over the tips. And yet the pink and the green switch places. An impossibility. Well, it couldn't be because I just did it, so it must be possible. I hope you guys have a little bit of fun learning this thing and fool your friends, make them laugh, have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll see you next week.